Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right then. On with the show.
All right, hello, welcome everyone to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. I am Michael Flores, the host and curator for tonight's show, and welcome to the House of Mystery. I have been in quarantine, so I'm not wearing any pants right now. I'm relaxed. And I'm in studio with David, in the House of Mystery with David. Hello, Dave. Hold on a second. Your mic's not working.
How's that?
There we go.
So the House of Mystery is now turned into a rave, I see.
Yeah. Well, Dave, we're doing a live show on a Friday night. I'm drinking wine. That's why your mic was off, because I think I might have drank too much.
Well, dude, as long as basically it's not like the demon mansion that we discussed in one of the House of Mysteries from the animated movie.
No.
I don't want to go into a painting and be tortured to death.
No. Nothing like that. When I drink wine, I'm happy. So the night nurse is with us right now. And she will also...
With the night nurse.
She will be here all night as well. A little TMI. But isn't that what this show is? Like, isn't there tons of TMI? Don't we just get we go a little too far sometimes, right?
Because the House of Mystery goes into the darker corners of our mind.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So today we are going to discuss, review, break down DC's New 52 Constantine Volume 1, The Spark and the Flame, which consists of Constantine issues number 1 through 6. Are you ready, Dave?
Oh, this is something that we've been waiting for quite some time, because now we've been talking about Constantine, how old school Constantine fans love him.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to be talking about new Constantine.
Yeah, so strap yourself in. This is going to be a divisive conversation here because, Dave, I don't know how I feel, honestly, because going into the Wayback Time Machine, when this had originally dropped and I read it, I was, I didn't hate it, but I was upset about a lot of it. But now that it's all said and done and I understand what they were doing, objectively, it's not horrible. It's just very different.
It's very, very different. And honestly, I was really critical on this when this first came out.
I think a lot of Hellblazer, because you were an old school Hellblazer fan.
Not just that. I mean, like, as an old school Hellblazer fan, yes. But you had one of the best writers at that time covering this title.
Milligan?
Which is Jeff Lemire.
Oh, well, he didn't really flex his creative muscles in this issue.
Yeah. I mean, like, it felt like Jeff Lemire was kind of like he was held back, because, like, if you know some of his past works, I mean, especially like Sweet Tooth and the number one that everyone talks about with Jeff Lemire is Animal Man.
Yeah, well, Dave, to be honest with you, after reading these issues, I never have ever wanted to read anything by Jeff Lemire.
And that's what a lot of people, when this first came out, said, because
his career took a tumble after this.
Yeah, a lot of, like, the luster that was on his name kind of wore off. And just like what you alluded to, I mean, when you actually... Now that everything's done and we get to actually see what the overall game plan was for Constantine to put him into the New 52,
right?
We kind of understand it, and we kind of understand why Jeff Lemire, just as creatively, had to be held back. Because
I don't think he was held back, Dave.
For me,
I think it was his own doing, and we'll get into why.
Yes.
Okay. Because. You know what? Let me save it, because I don't want to jump too far ahead. But this title besides the obvious, is regarded to some as divisive due to how the series came about. Because at this time, the original John Constantine Hellblazer title was still being published, but it would soon come to an end to make room for DC's massive marketing push known as the New 52.
Yes.
And that's what really rubbed people the wrong way, because many people were like, well, okay, you want to bring a New 52. There's tons of different titles out there with characters that aren't directly tied into the main DC title. You have side stories all the time. You have the Elseworld titles. You can bring in Constantine and do what you want in this world, but also keep the Vertigo stuff going. Mm-hmm. But no, they brought it to an end and canceled an issue that was running for years, 300 titles or 300 issues. And it was just canceled because DC decided they wanted to revamp their line, their IPs. And that's why so many people were upset, because of the cancellation of a title that wasn't floundering. Yes, at times when you're close to 300 issues, sometimes the stories can get a little stale, right?
Yes.
But that wasn't the case with Hellblazer. I mean, Peter Milligan, who had written, I believe, issue 250 through 300 for Hellblazer, was on his A game. He wasn't doing anything wrong, and yet, hey, you know what? We're going to do a little marketing shift, everyone, and this means some cancellations. All right, cool. What are we going to cancel? Some titles that aren't being read that much, that have no fan base? No, we're going to actually cancel Hellblazer. Wait, what the fuck? Wait, you're joking, right? No. We're going to go ahead and do that.
Because unfortunately that world is a little too scary for us.
Yeah, and we want to bring him into the main. We want him to play with Superman and Batman. Like, what? What the fuck? Is this April Fool's? Come on, this isn't real.
We want him to kind of bang Wonder Woman.
What? I can get behind that. Now that's the first good idea you've had. So when this happened, I had very strong feelings about it. And as I said at the top of the show, in retrospect, the New 52 Constantine was not a complete failure. No. Was it different? Absolutely. Very different. But looking back, this marketing gimmick ultimately did what it was intended to do. And yes, the New 52 overall, even to this very minute, is considered a failure to most people.
To most people, but when you
a big disappointment.
When you actually look at the long game to the New 52, you begin to see that basically what they were able to do was they were able to take titles and characters that were floundering before New 52. All of a sudden change them up, make the fans, miss them and care about them. Yeah. And suddenly they have to bring them back.
Right.
They did that to Superman. They did it to Batman. Constantine, this was the perfect example of that.
Well, yes, with making him disappear from Hellblazer, but when you look at, in my opinion, okay, the single greatest thing the New 52 did was it did do exactly what they wanted to do. It brought Constantine to mainstream appeal. There were a lot of people that, yes, I've heard of him. I saw his title on the mature rack under Vertigo. I never really wanted to go there because I read these over here. There are a lot of people like that, and I'm not diminishing them as comic book readers. I'm not talking bad about them, but there are, and I understand. There are some people that don't watch certain things on TV because of the mature factor. I get it, and the same thing applies for comics, so I understand that. So the goal was to bring Constantine into the mainstream, essentially, and say, hey, here's a character that can benefit from a little mainstream appeal. He's a character with years of mythos. Let's have some fun with him. Let's use him to do a few things that hasn't quite worked well on the mainstream side of things. Mm-hmm. And yes, overall, the New 52 didn't work out as well as DC had hoped, but it did make room for a new Constantine fan base. by bringing this character from the pages of Vertigo and into more of a mainstream aspect. They exposed millions of people who otherwise never would have heard or cared about this character. And I will say, for me, the absolute best thing to come from the New 52, besides the injection of new life for John Constantine as an IP, is Justice League Dark, led by JC himself.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, I do have some strong feelings at times about some of the writing within JLD, but overall, the concepts, the stories, the backdrops were very cool. And it was something very different, and it was a great way to introduce new readers to the faces of magic.
Yes.
So
that was the point.
That was the point, exactly. And looking at it from that point of view, it is a success. But ultimately, as an idea, the New 52 failed. And
As an idea and financially.
Right. And we're not going to get into all of that because this is the New 52 show. No. We're talking about Constantine. Mm-hmm. Now, we've got to focus our conversation, and to make this a bit more formal, let's get into the details here, Dave.
Okay.
Constantine, Volume 1, The Spark and the Flame, which consists of Constantine issues 1 through 6, was written by Jeff Lemire and Ray Fox. Mm-hmm. It includes a quest to find the last piece of a powerful mystic artifact and Constantine's run-in with the power of Shazam. Yeah. I still don't know how I feel about that. There was a moment in these issues where Constantine essentially stole the power of Shazam, I believe in issue 5.
Yes.
And was it cool to see Constantine have the Shazam power? Yes.
It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
That's the next thing I was about to say. But yes, it was ridiculous because it really didn't serve any story. And that's how you can look at a lot of the New 52 and Constantine. There are cool moments. You're like, that is really cool. A little over the top.
But that's the whole point.
Right. It is the whole point. But then it's missing the nuanced story aspect. It's missing the why. Why did you do that? Okay, you did it, but why? And that's something the regular Vertigo Hellblazer title is doing currently right now under Cy Spurrier's leadership. And, of course, old pre-New 52 Hellblazer, right?
Oh, yeah.
There was always a why behind what was happening. And I felt like it was a lot of flash and coolness without the actual substance behind it.
Yeah, and especially, it's even more jarring to a character like Constantine because you got to remember one of the core tenets of Constantine as a character. Well, it's one of his most famous sayings. You cheat the system and you have to expect, and it tries to compensate. Nobody really understands how or why, but it does. Magic is costly. And you take what you didn't earn, but you have to pay for it.
Yeah, and when he says you don't know how or why, I'm like, no, like explain how or why. Because in fact, in the books of magic,
you explain why.
The 93 series that we covered, there is a why.
Yeah.
And we understand why. But for some reason, in the New 52, Jeff Lemire was like, I'm going to have him just say, hey, we don't know why, but there's a cost. We always knew why.
We always knew why, and we know
and the
that
why
there's a cost.
And the why and the how and the because is what defines Constantine as a character.
Yes, it's his motivation. It's his core motivation.
And that's why this series frustrates me, because those moments. Jeff, did you never read Constantine?
Well, here's the problem with Lemire's writing, especially in the very beginning. There's times when you think he wants to say something, but then he doesn't. And it's like, just as a Lemire fan that I was coming off of Animal Man, where his writing was fantastic. He explains why everything works in that universe.
So you're saying he was stunted a bit? You think he was prevented?
Feel, it feels like he's stunted. He's like, I want to tell you why, but oh wait, here's Constantine saying we don't need to know the why, so I guess I shouldn't.
Okay.
But
well, this is why I don't agree with you, Dave, on that. And usually you and I always agree. And again, I have never read Jeff Lemire stuff except this, okay? So I will also say that. You have read Jeff's other work.
yeah.
But Peter Milligan did a great job with the first volume of Justice League Dark.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that Peter Milligan, again, being the man that was writing Hellblazer up until it got canceled, was also tasked to start Justice League Dark. And I was completely just drawn in with that first volume. I was like, this is different, but really cool. Loved it. It was a great starting point. And then he leaves after volume 1 because he was just there to get it started. And
Yeah.
guess who takes over? Jeff Lemire.
Jeff Lemire.
And he starts with his own version of the Books of Magic. And it's a fucking disaster.
It's a disaster.
It's a disaster of a story. And that's why I have never managed to be a true fan of Jeff Lemire, because he has lots of good ideas. He does. In fact, that's what a lot of the critics were saying
Yeah.
back in 2011, 2013, when this all started. Great concepts, cool settings, but where's your story, bro?
Exactly.
Where's your writing at?
I mean, think about how this particular volume opens up.
Mm-hmm.
You have John Constantine traveling from place to place for the first time, because you got to remember, all of Constantine's stories have taken place in London.
Right.
And suddenly we're seeing John travel from from London to New York.
And we
to
don't know
Norway.
why until later.
We don't even know why.
No, we kind of get the idea. I want to say in issue 4.
Issue 4, yeah,
Issue
but in the
4,
first issue,
You have
reason.
you have no idea why he's in the United States.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a
There's
problem.
none. That's a problem. And then even toward the end, when you get introduced to,
Because they don't say anything in Justice League Dark either, do they?
no,
Which was
nothing.
running 2 years before this, and
Mm-hmm.
and I don't and I read all of it, and overall I like it, but I don't think they ever mentioned why.
why he travels so much.
In fact, I remember in the first volume he was pulled over because of Madame Xanadu. She pulled him over into where they were at.
Yes.
But then he never went back. But then these issues, in issue 4, they allude to the fact that there's a curse and he can't go back or he'll dies.
Or he'll die.
I'm
yeah.
like, well, when did that happen?
When did that
this,
happen?
When did this curse happen?
Great idea. Just like what you said about Lemire. Great idea.
And Dave, if we miss something out there, let's say there's a side story or we just have forgotten because it's been a lot of years, please tweet us at Hellblazer Fan and let us know if we missed something as to why when this curse happened. The curse was, I don't want to jump all over the place, but go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
But like, and then on top of that, so you introduce a cool concept, a cool idea, doesn't go anywhere. Yes, later on we get to a slight allusion to it, but it's again a great idea, no execution. And then even further on in the beginning of your story, you introduce to me, which was a cool concept, which was the cult of the cold flame.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You tie it to Sorcerer Sargon,
Well,
and like
mainstream version,
mainstream version,
which is a
true.
hot daughter with big boobs and her ass hanging out.
But here's the thing: cool concept, right? Mm-hmm. Does it even amount to anything?
No,
Nothing.
Well, right.
The execution is non-existent.
And that's why I'm so torn with this issue, because I will say I did enjoy it. Because yes, we essentially get a story about a John Constantine that has now moved from London to New York, like you mentioned, and we're tossed into a story rather quickly that revolves around something called the Croydon's Compass, I believe. And that is a cool concept.
Cool concept.
The concept was designed, or I should say the compass was designed by a mad wizard named Angus Croydon, and he had committed murder and cannibalism in order to fuel the power of the compass.
How cool is that? That's
That
a cool
is
idea.
that is fucking awesome. Awesome concept. I cannot get more on board with that idea. I mean, the compass is dangerous in the hands of evil because it can point the direction to any magical resource. I mean, talk about pushing the envelope in terms of risk and really bringing the idea and the full concept of magic into the regular DC imprint. It works. The concept is amazing. And, John is tossed in this whole scenario because he's intent on keeping it out of the hands of evil. But my biggest issue with that concept is, what are they all about? We're introduced to Sargon, right?
Yes.
Sorceress Sargon?
Yes, sorcerer,
which is the daughter, okay, this is her first appearance. Cool concept, cool character. Mr. E, love the original version of Mr. E.
Mm-hmm. Zatara
is in flashbacks because they're giving you the backdrop of the forefathers of the cult of
the Cold Flame.
The Cold Flame. So that's all awesome, but in the very first volume, you're given all of these things. You were, for example, with Mr. E, you replace this twisted, complicated individual that wrestles with an inner evilness. That's the type of character he is, or
Yes.
he was. And you sand it down to a very simple, run-of-the-mill villain whose apparent desire is just power. Again, there is no why. Why do you want that power? There's always, to complicated villains, when you have a complicated villain, like Mr. E, for example, in the Books of Magic, the 1993 book series that we had covered, Mr. E wasn't entirely on the up and up.
No.
I would even say at that time, even though he was working on the good side of things, he was a man that was dangerously close to being evil.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay? But you understood why he was evil and why he was doing what he was doing. Do I feel empathy for him? No. Do I understand his perspective? Yes, I do. With this version of Mr. E, it's just, I want the compass because I want power. Well, why do you want the power? What do you want to do?
Exactly.
There's no whys to anything.
And the frustrating part about the Mr. E part is, like, if he's a character that's totally based on I just want power, you're coming from a series of the Books of Magic where he's dealing with the most powerful he's dealing with the most powerful being in magic that just came about in oh my god, I forgot the character's name. Tim.
Right.
In Timothy Hunter.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, you remember Tim, right? Right, Mr. E? If you just want power, what about him?
Well, that's the thing, is that these are... okay, so John Constantine, this is why it gets confusing. So this version of John Constantine has all of the history of the Vertigo John Constantine. He has the history. They mentioned Newcastle. They mentioned various other things. So it is that John Constantine. But at this moment, he jumped into the world of the surreal.
Of the capes.
Of the capes. And yes... capes existed in the Vertigo run. That's not something we're going to argue. They did, but there was a more grounded aspect to the Vertigo run. This is not grounded. This is 100% in the world of Superman, up and away, team-ups, crossovers, flying people, women in hot pants. Like, it's a thing.
It's a thing.
And it's fine, it's cool, and it serves its purpose. But John Constantine shares the same path. This John Constantine shares the same past as the one we knew in Vertigo. Mm-hmm. But many of these other characters don't.
And that's what was frustrating about it.
Honestly, it's confusing. It's confusing to a reader of the Vertigo runs or the older DC run or fans of the Trenchcoat Brigade. You're like, wait a second. Why does Mr. E look like a Joker character without the makeup?
And why does he look like a vampire?
Yeah, it was a little confusing. So those are some of the things I wrestled with. Now, Volume 1 is And this could be the very reason maybe Jeff Lemire was just handed more than he can handle, and that's not a bad thing. We all have our limits.
Yeah.
Volume 1 is a bit of a mixed bag. Jeff Lemire and Ray Fox were essentially tasked with a lot of things at once. Starting a new era of Constantine, new stories, characters, settings, while also trying to work in the big DC crossover that was also going on at this time, which was the Trinity War. It was an 11-issue comic book story arc.
Yes.
Okay, now the 11 issues just was the main story, because then you had an endless amount of side tie-in stories. I'm in the middle of rereading them just so I can have more perspective or
Understanding.
context of the Constantine Volume 1. When I had decided we were going to cover this, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go back and reread the entire Trinity War as well, so I can see how the world of Constantine is being affected at this time. And for the most part, we're probably going to cover it, Dave, so get ready. I know you don't like the Trinity War, but we're going to cover it eventually because it has a lot to do with, or I should say the Justice League Dark played a big part in the Trinity War.
Well, the problem with the New 52 now is, yes, I'm not a big fan of the New 52 and the Trinity War, but then with the current landscape of like DC,
Right, yeah.
then it all comes into focus and you begin to realize there was a method to this madness.
There was a method to the madness,
And
yes.
And I'm like, hey, I give them props. It took them how many years to get to this point? And suddenly we all now understand the whole point of New 52, not just on a commercial basis,
It was just messy.
but on a narrative. And it's all gets explained in this epic moment that I personally liked. I liked the whole Doomsday Clock storyline was really interesting. And then when you get to the payoff and you say, this is why the New 52 happened. And this is why all the characters are now changing back.
Right.
And it's like, okay, that's pretty impressive. It took you all this years for this build.
And we don't even know really if that was the original plan, because wasn't the stated plan of the New 52 was to bring in the Magic characters, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's why you had the Trinity War crossover.
Yeah, the Trinity War crossover.
Because that was directly tied into the world of Magic. Because not only, again, Jeff Lemire and Ray Fox weren't just working on reintroducing Constantine while working on Justice League Dark, while working on the Trinity War crossover. Guess what else they were tasked and a part of? Reintroducing Shazam into this version of DC continuity.
And with all of that,
it's too much.
It's too much. But then you get to the payoff of Doomsday Clock and then Hellblazer, the return of Hellblazer. It all comes into focus. This is all supposed to lead to the point of John's major storyline of be the better version of yourself, which is a fantastic so far.
You really think that's what they're trying? They weren't trying to work towards that. I think conveniently, Cy Spurrier.
I think it may be convenient.
Spurrier is a good writer,
but here's the thing: rereading the volumes because, like, you know, we're rereading the volumes now.
Yeah,
and I'm looking at this, and now with the information I have, it flows way too perfectly.
I think, Dave, we've had 7 years to reflect, and we don't hate it anymore.
Yeah,
I think that's what it is, because I
used to hate it.
Oh, so did I. And now that I'm going back and rereading, I'm like, you know what? It's not horrible. It's just not. It is not John Constantine.
It's not Constantine.
It's not. It's just it's a different version, and that's why when you look back, DC, the decision makers probably should have just kept the original Hellblazer title running in parallel. Like, hey, if you want to bring John Constantine into the mainstream, fine, do it. But why cancel a successful title?
Here's the thing, though. A lot of fans have stated that just should have continued Constantine. But if you think about it, if we did that, we would never have Gaiman returning for the Sandman universe. We just wouldn't.
Yeah.
You would never have.
Well, we would never have known that would be a possibility.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't really miss it, would we, Dave?
That's a lot of, and that's the thing. It's so weird taking a look like me and you have taken retrospective looks at past comics, and they have their place etched in comic book lore, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll be honest, this moment when I was rereading everything, I realized without this issue, we are not at the place where a lot of us fans are really happy with John Constantine. Without this, you don't get the current Hellblazer run that is being sold out everywhere.
No, dude, listen, that's why I appreciate these iterations of the New 52, because I adore the Justice League Dark. I love it. It's a complicated relationship that I have between Justice League Dark and myself. But I love the New 52 because it brought without the New 52, there would be no Justice League Dark. Yes, those characters existed beforehand. You know, we had Zatanna, we had Xanadu, we had Swamp Thing, we had Deadman.
And Dr. Fate.
We had these people. We had Constantine, but not as a group, not as a team.
Not as a team.
And to have that is something that I will always be grateful for. And ultimately, it led the way for this Constantine revival of sorts. And as I said at the top of the show, if they didn't do this, Constantine would not be as popular as he is right now.
As he is right now. Now
that's why it's a catch-22.
It's a catch-22. I mean, we get Tommy Willowtree out of this.
No, shut up. All right, so let's tackle some issues, I guess, with the character of Constantine himself, okay? Now, when it comes to John Constantine, what's new and different with this character, right? Let's talk about that. He's not quite himself, as we have alluded to. He looks like Constantine. He doesn't talk like Constantine.
No.
He's missing a writer, and I think ultimately that might be the problem. He's missing a writer that truly understands not only his characterization, Dave, but are you ready for this? His culture, his speech patterns, his dialect. It's not remotely the same as it was during the Hellblazer runs.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like they heard a few British people speak, and then they throw in certain catchphrases that are cliche to British culture, but not true to how Constantine has spoken throughout the years.
Yeah.
That was my single great... I don't want to say single because I had other problems, but that was probably my biggest problem, is that I didn't feel like this was truly Constantine. He didn't talk like him, but what really hurted this series ultimately, more than anything, Constantine's motives. What was his motivation for any of this? Just like the villains, where's the why? Okay, so you wanted to prevent someone else from having the power. But there were allusions to Constantine being dangerous and evil. And okay, so that wasn't just me, right?
No, it's not just you. I saw this too, and I was like really, really confused at first couple issues seeing this, because John doesn't do things out of malice. He doesn't.
That's the word, Dave, I was looking for. He doesn't. It felt like we just had a guy that was hungry for control. And yes, he's an addict, but the subtle compassion that he has was kind of missing. In the very first issue, one of his friends died, and he didn't even react to it. He's like, well.
Yeah, he just tosses him aside.
And in other issues of Hellblazer, yeah, he might do the same thing, and he would move on because he's very good. He's an expert at kind of shutting off his emotions, right, and feelings.
Yeah.
But we see that. We see him struggling. We see him trying to forget it. We see him attempting to block it out. In these issues, we didn't see any of the inner struggle.
The inner struggle. I mean, take it into parallel, okay? in the very first issue when his friend ends up dying. Take that into parallel with what we saw in the recent Hellblazer
With Willow Tree.
with the storyline before Willow Tree with the hobo.
Yes.
The hobo when
That's right.
He's telling the hobo, "Hey, don't do this because this is what's going to happen, and I'm trying to save you at this point."
And never mind the fact. We got to fill this up a little bit more, Dave. Now remember that the hobo is racist. He's
Yes.
killing people because he's prejudiced. He's a piece of shit.
He's a piece of shit.
And yet Constantine is warning him and saying, "Listen, man, if you don't stop, I'm going to be forced to do something. I don't want to." That's all you need.
Yeah.
It shows a little compassion there. Yes, Constantine plays fast and loose many times, but he's never not a human. He's never a stone. And when he does make those decisions that cost lives, which he does, you see him struggle with it.
And then when you get to the first issue where his friend is pleading not to die and he dies, and suddenly you just see Constantine just walking off.
He just lights a cigarette. Oh, well.
He lights a cigarette and says, "Sure you will," and then basically just walks off. I'm like, what the hell, John? Who the hell are you?
Yeah, it threw me off a bit.
For me, the New 52 Constantine is missing the humanity.
Yeah.
He's missing that human nature of John where...
That's what I'm saying. This feels like just the surface of John Constantine.
Yeah.
And that's all we really see is the exterior of John Constantine without really getting into that. And that may change. And we are going to cover Volume 2 and Volume 3 and Volume 4. And maybe we'll get into that eventually. I don't remember, but throwing myself back to 2013, 2014, I kind of remember maintaining my anger. So we'll see. We'll see if they change that a bit. But that's the reason why I never could get behind Jeff Lemire 100%, because of some of those decisions. It felt like he's never read a Hellblazer comic before now. I mean, you could probably read 2 issues and read 2 issues of one of the best written, or I should say read 2 issues written by one of the better writers that wrote Hellblazer, and you would probably understand who this guy is.
Mm-hmm.
So now the decision to have Lemire write Constantine seems like a no-brainer, right? Because he was also in charge of the Justice League Dark series. There's that consistency there.
Yeah.
Although originally when this title was announced, Robert Venditti was originally attached as the creative team. He was going to be the writer. Are you familiar with his work at all?
A little bit, yes. He was also one of the, kind of like during that time, he was one of the really up-and-coming writers in DC's landscape. We're talking DC's landscape. And at first, everyone was kind of saying, okay, yeah, he's going to do the Constantine. But when Jeff Lemire came into the whole pool of Constantine, everyone was more or less pitching for Lemire, because Lemire was at that point coming off of Animal Man. And Animal Man was such critically a success.
I might have to read Animal Man, because if you're blowing him this much, there's got to be something good about him.
What was great what Lemire did, because in Animal Man, he was dealing with not just Animal Man, he was dealing with the concepts of the red and the green from Swamp Thing. And
really?
He did a fantastic job giving that backbone to kind of like... Beforehand, everyone understood the side of the green. But then Jeff Lemire went into the side of the red, which was the polar opposite of the green. And it's the source of Animal Man's powers. You know, he could tap into all animals in the planet. Of course, they all have to be undead, but still. He taps into the red. And he did such a fantastic job. When DC saw this, they said, you know what? He's coming off a hot title right now. we need him on this title because Constantine's our bread and butter. You know, I'm not saying that just because I'm a big Constantine fanboy, but at that time, there was a huge push to try to make Constantine relevant and put him into the echelon of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman.
Right.
Especially with the introduction of Justice League Dark.
Right. That was the whole point. Yeah.
You got to put your best writer right on that title then. And everyone was like, yeah, put Jeff on it. Jeff Lemire will do fantastic. Look what he did with Animal Man.
Well,
Look what he did with a character that was at that point.
Dave, listen. I hear you, bro. I hear you.
But
and
like,
maybe you should give me something really. You know what? I will be fair. Give me something that Jeff Lemire has written. I'll read it. Something that you feel is really well done. I will read it.
I think Animal Man. Just read Animal Man.
Okay.
That's what made me into a Jeff Lemire fan.
I mean, dude, the Books of Magic storyline and Justice League Dark is some of the worst comics I've ever read.
Yes.
Sadly. Especially, and it was so upsetting because Volume 1 with Peter Milligan was on point.
Well, a lot of comic book people have pointed out that Jeff Lemire did fantastic if you gave him titles that basically didn't have a lot of...
They didn't require talent?
No, like responsibility. Like if it's not a big franchise, he does fantastic. Okay. But then you gave him the big franchises, okay, see what you can do with the Books of Magic.
And maybe he was stressed. Maybe it was just too much going on. You know, and I will say...
There's some validity to that, too, is like a lot of writers... I've always read articles where writers have dreaded writing for major characters like a Superman.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Or a Batman.
Yeah. Well, why do you want to face the wrath of idiots like me?
Exactly.
On social media.
And then, let's face it, this is why I say Constantine is a very iconic character. And he's big. He's not small scale. He's not Buddy Baker. He's not Animal Man. He's John freaking Constantine.
He has a cult following.
Yeah. And then when you throw that onto a writer who's probably not up to the task of actually dealing with that type of stress, you get something like that. You know, no one can bat, you know, no one can play with the big boys, so to speak. You know?
Yeah. Well, I will say that I'd like to have read what Robert Venditti had planned.
I think so too.
Because after 7 years of reflection, what ultimately didn't work for me was Jeff Lemire's involvement. Writing. Yeah, I mean, his story ideas were good. I didn't have a problem with the ideas. There's some pretty solid fucking ideas here. But I think he was the weak link, even in JLD, the weak link, because as I said, when he took over Volume 2, it was like night and day. You can feel the shift in writing quality. In fact, I remember being surprised. It's like, wait, what happened here? And I'm reading the very first issue he wrote, and I'm like, this is off. I'm like, oh, okay. And I didn't notice that they had handed off the reins to Jeff Lemire. I thought it was Peter Milligan still writing. So even before I knew there were different writers, I had already felt the difference when I was reading. You can feel the shift in quality.
You can.
And the problems I had with his JLD run were similar to the issues I had with the overall New 52 Constantine, except that Ray Fox did a much better job keeping the narrative tight. The concepts were interesting, but never fully explored. And I felt like Jeff Lemire had this idea that Constantine, as I said, was a villain of sorts at times.
And just to add to your what if scenario, right? If Venditti did it, look what Venditti went on to do. He jumped onto Green Lantern at that point, and Green Lantern exploded on the scene. Like, it became one of the hottest titles during that time, and one of the only really hot selling titles in the New 52 was Green Lantern.
Wasn't one of his titles also picked up and turned into a movie?
I think.
Was it Surrogates?
I think so.
Does that sound right?
That sounds right, I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, The Surrogates, his first comic book movie. The story was later adapted into a feature film starring Bruce Willis and Ving Rhames.
Oh, yeah, see? So he was definitely, and when did that happen? What years were that?
That was in
I think around
2002.
2002. Okay, so
Yeah.
he had already made a name for himself for a while. So,
Mhm.
yeah, so we also had the introduction. This is definitely worth mentioning. We had the reintroduction of Papa Midnite. I want to say in issue
Yes.
4, and I did like that issue.
I did.
And
I did too.
and the reason why, because it was a more grounded issue that focused on Constantine as a person. And that's my favorite issue of all of Volume 1, because it was about a man who had no friends.
Pretty much.
And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
this is fucking good.
This is and the thing is, that's something that's very familiar to Constantine. He's a man on his own. You know, he doesn't have many friends.
Yeah. And the fact that he doesn't want to tell anybody that he has no friends, but he goes about his business, because it's basically a day in the life of Constantine. That's what issue number 4 is. He walks around, he stumbles into trouble, he realizes that his friends want to kill him, people are out to get him, and then we get the introduction of Papa Midnite, which, holy shit, dude, for a regular mainstream DC title to show beheadings and bodies cut in half
That was intense.
and their intestines hanging, I'm like, nice. Good job. I'm glad they didn't refrain from at least a proper Papa Midnite type introduction. Now, his wardrobe choices, a little ridiculous. It fits the
Yeah.
new 50, it fits the regular DC line, you know, the cape vibe.
Yeah,
the
the
superhero-
outlandish,
Yeah.
you know, over the top stylings.
But I will say issue 4 is definitely my favorite one, because you cut away all the larger than life shenanigans, the villains that really didn't have a lot of development, and you just focused on Constantine.
Yeah.
And you saw him thinking. And that's the best part about Constantine. We want to be, at his core, the archetype or the genre that guides this storyline, or which serves as the transport for John Constantine's storyline, is a film noir.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to get inside the head of your protagonist.
Of your detective.
Yes. And in issue 4, there were those moments where we were truly able to get inside of Constantine's head.
And that's the thing that I think was missing out of the New 52, where if you look at the Hellblazer and the Vertigo run of Constantine is a detective.
Is he the greatest detective?
He's a thinking man's hero. You know, he solves puzzles, he solves crimes, he figures things out.
He's like Columbo.
Here, and the one thing I always had a problem with is like, well, what spell is John going to use to get himself out of this problem? Mm-hmm. And that's the trope that basically I was totally against with the New 52 Constantine, is like, his magic is secondary. The power of Constantine is his
mind.
freaking mind.
Yeah.
His mind and his wit, because he could talk himself out of
He's
any
cunning.
scenario.
Yes.
And I enjoyed this issue too, especially with the introduction of Papa Midnite, who's one of my favorite characters.
Right. We need to cover his miniseries.
Papa Midnite is like, you want to do a story about him, but also you kind of don't, because it's going to be really dark and you might not like where you go.
I hope the new Sandman universe
Brings in Papa. Oh, they got to.
Please.
They got to.
Please.
The only problem is like,
Or at least a dead man. I'll go. Listen,
Deadman?
toss it up between Deadman and Papa Midnite. Those are my two favorites.
yeah.
I will take either or. I'll be happy with either one.
The thing is about, like, with Constantine and trying to make him survive in a superhero universe, this is the problem that they had with the New 52 Constantine, is like, no, Constantine's out of his element at this point, because the way he beats people, the way he defeats the bad guy in the end, is he outwits them.
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, he's a detective, and he solves a crime. He solves the mystery, and it's one of those things that I think gets overlooked in all of New 52 when it comes to Constantine. Is like, I really do not like it when they focus on, oh, Constantine has to go find this artifact. Why does he need the artifact? What's the cost that he has to take to do it? Oh no, he just has to travel to Norway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And why does he have what is it, a pet store? Why does he have an entire magician's room underneath the pet store?
Underneath the, I mean, it's cool.
Why is he in the United States?
It's his bat cave. It's his bat cave, but again, it's kind of like,
why isn't he? Do we know why he's not using the House of Mystery? I can't remember at this point.
I think the House of Mystery was separate at this point because
this is running at the same time as
Constantine,
as the Trinity War crossover, which he has the House of Mystery. So why is he hiding out in the bottom of a pet store?
Of a shitty pet store.
You have the House of Mystery. It's almost like they're two separate stories.
And that's the thing, is like they never
or two separate universes. Yeah. There's some inconsistencies even between JLD and the Constantine storyline. It feels like they're just a little messy. So, and honestly, Dave, we're not the only ones. The fans were the only ones that had issues, which is sad kind of, but even the announcement was met largely with disappointment from the industry.
Because a lot of people really, really questioned if this character could fit into the DC universe.
DC's own creators were iffy and disappointed with what was going on with Constantine. Because you got to remember, if you're writing comic books, you're probably a fan of Constantine.
Yes.
And one of the writers, Joshua Hale Filikov, I want to say is how you pronounce his last name. He was the writer on I, Vampire, which in its own way, I, Vampire is actually pretty fucking charming.
Oh, it is.
Okay, so you read it?
I've read I, Vampire.
Dude,
I really like it.
I like it. It's a little melodramatic, but it fits into the whole vampire idea.
Especially in the DC landscape.
Yeah, I like it.
It's a very charming book.
Yeah. So he expressed sadness.
I think I remember this.
Publicly, he expressed sadness because he said he would never get to write the real Constantine. And he noted crime author and former Hellblazer writer Ian Rankin stating, also, Constantine was the only comic book character he ever wanted to write for. And comic writer Leah Moore expressed doubt that Constantine could replace Hellblazer, among others.
Yeah.
As a result, DC co-publisher Dan DiDio issued a statement defending this decision, stating that Hellblazer has had a long and incredibly successful run, and that's a tip of the hat to all the great creators that have worked on the book over the years. The new Constantine series will return him back to his roots in the DCU.
In the DC universe.
Okay, listen. Yes, back to his roots on the imprint that he had started on, but the imprint from oh, come on, Dan DiDio, you know better.
That's why I think
the
that's
imprint
why I
was also
think
very different. The reason why they even made Vertigo was so they can continue these stories without changing what was happening on the DC mainstream side, and without offending people, and without worrying about the rating systems and censor board. Let's put it on a mature title. That was the whole point. So Dan DiDio's reasoning behind this, we're going to bring it back to his roots.
No, you didn't.
You just put it back on the imprint that it had started on.
Yes.
So Constantine has received mixed reviews from critics, praising the story but criticizing its characters, setting, and artwork. That's essentially what we had just been doing.
Well,
we're okay with the story, right? Which is the story is generally the ideas.
The ideas are really good. I mean, the last thing too is like even the artwork. I mean, normally I forgot who the artist is that was covering the title, but at the time, it really felt to me like the art was trying to be Hellblazer.
Okay.
It was desperately trying to be Hellblazer with its quirky angles and, oh look, let's try to give more, like, let's make the characters look a little bit more, I don't want to say this, but uglier. Let's make them look more scruffier looking so they look edgy.
So,
and I'm like going, all the art just is telling me is like, I want to be Hellblazer, but I can't.
all right. So, Dave, yes, it's very different. But honestly, this is where I'm okay with it. Renato Geitz, I believe is his name, is the artist for at least the first volume of Constantine. Now, going back into the time machine, okay, yes, vastly different style. You go from a film noir, like horror vibe, to something more Superman feeling. And yes, appropriately so, we're dealing with the main DCU, right?
Yes.
So I understand it, but I think at that time it was shocking. But reading this 7 years later again, I'm actually okay with the artwork. I actually enjoyed it for the most part. It's not as creative, but that's also from the writing. You got to remember the scripting usually is it's just like a director for a movie. The scripting is telling the artist, yes, there's some leeway, they have some latitude, but for the most part, the writer's scripting out how all these panels will lay out because it's their story. It helps with their narrative. So I think Renato did as good as he can.
That's the thing.
With Lemire's coaching, I guess. I
that's
think
what it feels like. It's like Renato's art is, it's trying to get somewhere, but something's holding it back. I've always said that he's trying to capture that Hellblazer look.
I can't disagree.
Vibe.
And but also at the same time being a little more bright and friendly for new readers.
Especially when you get really close-up shots of Constantine, and sometimes Constantine looks too pretty for his own good.
Well, he's a lot younger. You got to remember, wasn't he 50? Almost 50 years old in the later
I think so,
issues of Hellblazer?
Yeah, he's a little bit more aged.
Yeah, so ageism. Thank you, DC, for that. Old people aren't good enough for the regular DCU. We have to make them 25 years younger. No one wants to read about old people, right? So, all right. You know what, Dave? Quickly, we're almost out of time. We actually have 2 minutes. So give me your final thoughts in 30 seconds or less with your percentage.
Final thoughts. I was really surprised actually going back retrospectively and looking at this. I used to remember I hated this series.
Mm-hmm.
I hated it from issue 1 because I was like, this isn't John. Forget this.
Yeah.
But retrospectively now, I do see that there is some charm behind it, especially when you actually take the chance to step back and see where it all leads up to. And I'm like going, you know what? Without this, I'm not going to get arguably one of the funnest stories I've read in a long time and be the better man.
Yeah. So what's your percentage?
My percentage on this one, surprisingly, is not very low.
Yeah.
I would give this a 68.
Okay.
A 68, which is, it's a comic.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bash it.
All right. I'm going to give this a 70% because it isn't horrible.
Yeah.
Now, if this was 7 years ago, I probably would have given it 27%.
5.
But 7 years later, and it's not as bad as people remember. There are some solid story aspects. There are elements within Lemire's story that's begging, story elements that's begging to be told.
And so he never got to it too.
Yes, and it's a little frustrating, but the concept and much of what we're working with is solid and it works. So, 70%. All right, that does conclude our discussion on John Constantine, Volume 1. I want to thank everyone for listening, and please remember, we do all of this because we're just nice gentlemen.
Yes.
And we do need the help from our listeners. So if you want to help us be able to continue to do these discussions and shows, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/RainmanDigital, and pledge $1 or more a month. And you'll gain access to additional discussions and shows, and it helps us stay on the air. Every little bit helps. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And good night.
Work on your mantra like Tommy Willowtree.
Jesus.